Hi guys, and welcome to another video on my channel, and as you can see we have the Zhiyun Smooth Q 3-axis smartphone stabilizer. So I've just done the video on the Feiyu-Tech Gimbal C. Now that came out about a year ago. I believe the Smooth Q actually came out probably about 6 months, maybe a little bit more ago. So again, slightly behind the times on that, but it's one of those products that I wanted to get my hands on for a while because I've often done Zhiyun and Feiyu-Tech products, and historically so far I've found that Zhiyun are probably a little bit better in terms of what they do. And interestingly, this at the moment is £99 on Amazon, so it's actually cheaper than the Gimbal C was. So I'm very interested to see how this comes out. Let's have a look at what we get in there. This is literally just a sleeve, so I'm going to chuck that out of the way, and then we do the unboxing, which is not going to be particularly dramatic because all you have is a case. A very nice looking case. We'll have a look at that at the moment. That's got the gimbal in it, obviously. You then have a strap which is for that case, and you've then got the usual micro USB charger, and that's literally just a USB cable, so you don't get a charger. That indicates immediately that this is going to be an inbuilt battery, just like the Gimbal C was. Obviously you also get a manual, so we might have a thumb through that at some point. So let's get this box out of the way now, and let's get this into frame. So immediately, this is a really nice looking case. Now, various different colors available. I went for the grey, I believe it was, so you get quite a shiny case. It's quite flamboyant. The black one's probably a little bit more subtle, but I like the feel of that. You can immediately see that it's kind of rigid. It's you know, it's got a kind of a soft rigidity to it, if that is such a thing. But let's have a look inside it. So open this up, and there we go. We have got the gimbal there, and you can see it's actually quite nicely molded. There's molding areas for it, so it's all contoured. It's not just an open, empty old case. So it's a big plus point for something that's only £99, which, you know, don't get me wrong, it's a reasonable amount of money. But for a product like this, that's quite nice to have something, you know, that's going to keep it well protected. So that's plus point on Zhiyun there, definitely. Okay, so let's move to the actual gimbal itself. So the first thing that we can see is it is apparently all plastic. Feiyu-Tech tend to have all aluminium at the top, and certainly with the Gimbal C they then had a plastic handle. These guys, Zhiyun, have gone with an all plastic kind of finish, but it looks pretty good quality in that respect. This is again the grey one. You can get this in different colours in terms of finish, but overall I have to admit that feels nice and solid. So some of the things to look at, naturally we want to look at the cage, the cradle for the phone, and how that goes together. So if we have a quick look at that, you can see here we've got a unlock button there. Now immediately I thought that was going to be similar to the DJI Osmo Mobile 1, whereby you undo this and it kind of opens up. That isn't the case. This is still a sprung loaded clamp, so you put your phone in there and you clamp it down. We've other than that, not much to mention there. We've got some nice soft padding there. That's kind of rubberized grip here. Nice and big, nice and decent size there. I'm fairly confident that's going to fit my phone even in its big armor case. We obviously do have this nut here. Now what that actually does, if we undo this, all it does is it loosens up the cage, and it means that you can flip the orientation of this. So should that be useful to you? Maybe, maybe not, but ultimately you can do that. I think it's designed so you can do it into like portrait mode, and when you're happy with what you want to do, you just tighten that down. Job's a good one. So in terms of the balancing feature, the way that this will actually balance with your phone, very similar to the Gimbal C there, is you have this nut here and you undo that nut, and that means that this arm can now slide back and forth. So if you've got a big heavy phone, if you've got something like a you know, an iPhone Plus sized phone, or one of the plus size Samsungs, you're going to need a lot of kind of counterbalance to the way it's out here. So you're going to want to pull that arm quite far out. Now, like the others, the only problem with that is that when you do this, it bangs into this bottom motor. So for that point of view, it's going to be much more difficult to store in this lovely case here, because it means you've got to undo this, you've got to slide it back up, and then you can put it back in, and you can house it and put it safely in that case. But, you know, not a major point to do that. You just have to remember to undo it and do it back up for storage. Other than that, features at the top, not really much to say. There is a little nut there. That's basically a lock to say that it can't go over a certain point. But yeah, all plastic, very well done. You know, no cables or anything like that lying around these days, like the older versions back in the day. Now let's look at the front here. So we've obviously got the joystick, so a fairly flush mounted joystick. but classic gimbal. That is pretty standard on all of them for moving around in up, down, left and right motions. A couple of LEDs there. We've then got the mode button. We've got the power and shutter button, and then we've got a little slider there. That's for zooming in and zooming out, so it's got WT written on there. On the side, you've got the charging port there, so that's micro USB. And then if we come round to the front of it, you'll actually see here there is a full-size USB port. Interesting to see that they've done that. A full-size USB port, not a micro one. Now, I believe that is for firmware updating, so you can actually plug it in. But interesting point there. We might have a look at that a bit later. And then on the bottom, you can see that we have a tripod mount, so standard 1/4 inch thread there. Now, that immediately means that there's no way of opening the bottom of it. You can't get the battery out, so this is all going to be reliant on an internal battery that you charge once. I believe you can put a power pack into it should you need to do that. No way of charging your phone either, so depending on where the charge port for your phone comes out, that's obviously going to be an issue. And of course, for us iPhone 7 users, it means that we're not going to be able to use headphones or get to any of that either, because that means you can't get there. Simple as that. Anyway, so that's an initial overlook of it. What I'll do now is I'll change angle, and then we'll put a phone in it, and then we'll play around with some of the features and obviously have a look at the app and see what it can do. Okay, so now we've got a bit of a better angle to see how this is actually going to work. First thing we need to do then is obviously get the phone in there. I am using an iPhone 7 in a rather large Iblason Armor case, but that just at least will prove whether or not it can actually cope with a decent sized phone in a case, because a lot of people do like to do that. To fit it, all we need to do is literally use the sprung clip here. Pop it in place there. As you can see, it reaches around. That's fairly solid. I don't have any issues with that falling out at all. I think that's going to be absolutely fine. And that's tucked in there. Now, immediately as we do that, you can see that the weight of the phone has grossly overweighted to the side of this. So we want it to be here. We want it balanced. So what we have to do there is we then grab this little nut at the back that we looked at earlier. We loosen that off, and then we pull it. So I'll pull it to the furthest possible extents. Pop it down there and we'll see how that copes. Okay, so that's actually overbalanced it now, so it's gone too far to the motor side, so we just need to adjust it ever so slightly. So I'll just slide it back again, roughly about there. I would say that's pretty much where we need it to be. It doesn't have to be 100% perfect, but the better that you've got the balance, the less work that the motors have to do to counteract the weight of the phone. And that's what it's all about, is you want these motors to really only be acting to counteract motion, not the weight of the phone. So try and make sure it's as balanced as possible. So that's all balanced now. Obviously the phone is flopped down because it's not actually turned on. So now what we'll do is we'll turn it on and we'll have a look at the features and the various stabilization modes. Okay, so we're all balanced up and we're ready to turn the device on. So to do that, we just press the red button here. Hold it down, indicator light there, that's actually a Bluetooth and a battery indicator. And then there's a little yellow light for charging, etc. on the right there. So when it turns on, you go into one of 3 different modes. You are in pan following mode. The other modes are following mode and locking mode, and then there's a couple of other little extras around that we'll talk about. So pan following mode, default mode, basically locks the horizon. So as you can see, if I waggle around like this, the phone will keep its horizon. If I want to look left, I tilt my wrist and look left. If I want to look right, I tilt my wrist and look right. At the moment, as it stands, if I want to look left and look right using the joystick, nothing will happen. So in the pan following mode, the left and right on the joystick will do nothing. So let's take an example that you're walking up to the edge of a bridge, which is the classic one that I use, and you want to see down. You want to see what's below that bridge. You walk up, you do this, nothing happens. Now, there's only 2 ways that you can then look down. The number 1 way, if you're in this mode, would probably be to use the joystick. So you can just grab down on the joystick, and that will tilt the phone down. And naturally, if you wanted to move back up, it will look up, and it will go even further. You can actually look at the ceiling if you wanted to. Now, the other way that you could do it is you could actually get out of this mode and you could double tap on the mode button. Resets the horizon, and then that will put it into mode 2, which is following mode. Now, what does that mean? That means if you look left, it looks left. If you look right, you look right. But if you were to tilt downwards, as you can see, the phone will also look downwards. So you go up to the edge of that bridge, you don't have to use the joystick, you just look down, you can see what's down there, you look back up and it does a nice slow motion there. So they are the two sort of basic shooting modes, and they're the main modes that you're going to be using. The one final mode that they call locking mode is activated. So if I want to get back to the main pan following mode, I'd single tap. So that is in the pan following mode. If we wanted to get into locking mode, we just single tap from here, and what happens now is the camera is completely locked into the position it was facing. So you can see if I move left and right, nothing happens. If I tilt, nothing happens. It's all very much fixed on that one location. Now we can use the joystick to look around if we wanted to. So we go left, right, up, down. There we go. And that's basically how that does, but wherever it lands, it will stop and it will continually look at that. So no matter what I do, it will always be looking in that location. So that is the lock mode explained there. Now, if you want to get out of that, we single tap, and again, it will reset to being in the pan following mode. So they are the main basic three modes. Now, the only other thing that's worth mentioning is there is the portrait mode. If you lean your gimbal over to a certain extent, it will go into portrait mode, and likewise you can use all the modes like that. If you want to tilt back, there you go, you're back into landscape mode. So that's basically the main functions there. And then finally, if you triple tap, then you get selfie mode, which is 1 2 3. Very simple. The phone will swing itself completely around and look at you. And again, if you want to get that back, tap tap tap, 1 2 3, and you're back there. So when it comes to actually kind of, day-to-day using of it, they're the modes that you're going to be using. Generally speaking, you're probably going to decide to yourself whether you want to use the mode 1 or mode 2. Locking mode can be useful if you want to just fix on an object, but generally you'll be using those two from that point of view. Now, the one thing that I did want to mention about mode 2, which was quite interesting to me, is that if I go into mode 2, so that is to say following mode, now if I wanted to look down again, I can look over that bridge, but in this mode the joystick does not actually function in the same way. If you were to use left and right in this mode, you'll see what it does is it will roll the horizon. Now, I can't think of many scenarios where you'd want to use that, if I'm honest, and my worry with this is that if you're in that mode 2 and you accidentally jog your finger onto the joystick, then it's going to ruin future shots because your horizon's off. So as you can see, it doesn't recorrect that horizon, and actually, in fact, if I were to single tap to go back into pan following mode, it sticks. So that horizon is now not recovered. And interestingly, I haven't found an easy way for it to actually get back into that mode. So if we do tap tap tap, it'll do selfie with the rolled horizon, and if we go tap tap, it doesn't automatically correct it. You have to manually correct it. So just bear that in mind. It's a bit of a strange one, maybe have a very few number of uses, but good if the horizon's off and you need to correct it, that's all well and good. But if you accidentally did that, you really could ruin some shots with it. So just bear that in mind. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just shut this down, and then I'm going to show you one other thing that this can do, which can be actually quite handy. So this extra mode is basically allows you to rotate the axis of the cradle itself. So I've taken the phone out, I'm now undoing this nut, and now I can spin this around. Now, why would I want to do that? Well, what it means is that what I can do is I can change the orientation of my phone. So if I spin it around 90 degrees, and now it means that I can put my phone in the cradle like so. Now, obviously, balancing needs to be considered. Naturally, this does not balance very well like that. It's going to be kind of flopped down like this. Now, what you need to do is you need to basically try and get your phone about halfway up in this cradle for this to work properly. So about like that. It's still going to feel slightly imbalanced, but you've got to bear in mind that the motor is going to kind of hold it up. So try and get it roughly to a point where it doesn't flop too much. Now, the back is impacting that motor. Obviously, I have a big phone, that's going to be a problem. And likewise, you can see that the left and right balance is completely off. So I need to undo this balance nut, push it in a lot further, and change it. Now, this is all a bit of a fiddle, and probably wondering why would you do that just to get it into portrait mode. But with this like this, let's now just turn it on. We'll see. It may not work first time. There we go. Right, excellent. Now we're in a portrait mode. Well, great. Why have you bothered doing that? You're asking me. Well, the main thing about this mode is that, yes, you can do it in portrait mode and you can film it, fantastic. But you can also flop it down into landscape mode and continue in filming as you were with landscape mode. You've got your cameras over this side, so as long as you don't get the roll access too much in the way, that's usable. The most important thing, though, is, as you can see here, your charging port is now available. Now, the reason that that's great is that, let's say you're in a situation, you've used this for a while, your phone's a bit dying, but your gimbal isn't, and this has got a decent battery life for it, or so it says. What you can do is you can actually access, on the back, this USB port, which I mentioned that I thought was for firmware. Actually, the side one is for firmware. This one is a pass-through. So all you do is you plug your iPhone charge cable into the main USB port here. You then run it to your charge point of your phone there, and you can actually charge your phone from the battery inside here. Now, you know, again, there's issues because you're going to get the roll access is going to get in your shot if you're not careful, but fundamentally you're still shooting and you're charging your phone at the same time, and that's something that's very, very rare for you to be able to do with any gimbal. So it's nice to see that Zhiyun have given some consideration to that, so you can at least use it as an option should that be a situation that you get yourself into. Anyway, that's an interesting one there, but what we'll now do is we'll turn it back off again, we'll load up the app and we'll have a look at some of the features. Okay, so let's have a look at the application itself. Now, I'm going to actually do this in offline mode purely because it makes it easier for me to actually show this to you via the iPhone's inbuilt screen viewer or screen recorder. So all you would do is you load up the app, you make sure Bluetooth is turned on, you click connect to device. At that point, as long as Bluetooth is turned on, it will then see the device and immediately connect to it. You don't have to do any Bluetooth pairing, anything like that. And once you've done that, you'll go into camera mode, and this is what you'll see. So what I'll do is I'll fly around the various settings. I don't want to spend too much time on this because they are quite feature filled, but at least it'll give you an overview of what you get. So let's start in the top left hand corner. Top left hand corner is the home button. If we tap on that, we'll go back to this home button. I'm just going to go back in again to the camera mode. To the right of the home button there is a Bluetooth icon. If that's lit up blue, you're connected to the device. If it's not, you know you're not. Underneath that then we've got the standard slider, so that is the video and photo slider, and then below that is the shutter button. Obviously starts video if it's in video mode, takes photo if it's in photo mode. Below that we have the flip camera, so that will turn the camera around to be the camera facing you as opposed to the one facing away. And then below that is the icon that takes you into the photo editor. Now, if you go into the editor, you'll find that basically the photos and the videos that are taken on the Zhiyun app are not stored on the camera roll. So you have to go into the editor and then you have to save to the camera roll if you want to be able to use those for exportation or anything like that. To the right of that icon, you've got a little symbol here. That's not actually connected, so if I tap on it, you'll say, please connect to device. That's the object tracking mode. So basically, when you tap on that, that then gives you the ability of drawing a box around an object, and it will then try to object follow that during filming. Moving over to the right hand side then, we've got the flash symbol. That's to say whether or not the flash is going to be on or off. We've got the settings, which I'm going to come back to in a moment. Below that then we've got the mode. So this is the video mode. So obviously there's a different icon for the photos, but we've got default, slow motion, time lapse, moving time lapse. Just looking at them very quickly, slow motion literally just puts it in a high frame rate. Time lapse gives you plenty of options for time intervals, shutter speed, durations, things like that. And then motion time lapse, if we go into that, much more feature rich. Again, it's a case of you basically point the camera where you want the first frame to be, you then point the camera where you want the second frame to be, and you just click the little black box with the plus icon to say that's the first frame, this is the second frame, and then you can choose your various parameters, choose how long you want the time lapse to be, and then it will move the camera automatically very slowly if it's a long time lapse, or relatively quickly if it's a fast time lapse, and it will then move from one location to another, and then it will basically stitch it all together as a video for you. Below that then we've got things like the video resolution, the white balance, manual mode. That is to say, if we go into manual mode and turn it on, what that does is that comes up with white balance and autofocus, everything at the bottom, so you can choose your own exposures. It doesn't do any automatic exposure, which is a nice feature to be able to see. So it actually proves to be quite a nice camera application from that point of view. I will just turn that back into automatic mode. Obviously you've got grid, so you can draw a grid over the top of things in different diagonals, center points, things like that, which can be quite useful. Flash, that's again set to off at the moment, but you've got on, auto, steady light, etc. And then anti-shake, which is kind of a mode that does it digitally removes shakiness, which is a bit of a strange one, but we can maybe have a play around with that a bit later on. Below that then we've got scene mode, so if we go into scene mode you could do walking, motion, fast, custom. We've got application mode, that is phone mode and phone control. I have to admit I don't know what that does, so I may have to come back to that a bit later. And remote control, there is the option on some of the Zhiyun products to be able to remotely control the movement of the gimbal, so you can put it on a tripod and move that by remote. Under that then we've got the various filters basically, so you can put different hues and different contrasts on, so you can have a green filter, you can have time, twilight, etc. I basically am going to use original. So they're the basics of it. If I just flip into the camera mode and then we look at this does actually change slightly when you're in camera mode. So we have single photo mode, you can put a 2-second delay, a 5-second delay, a 10-second delay, you can go to HDR mode. Then we've got panoramic mode. You've got 3 settings for that. You've got 180, 330, and then a grid, which does kind of a fisheye view, so it takes 3 photos at the top, 3 in the middle and 3 at the bottom. And then we've got long exposure mode, which is designed to set different sort of exposures based on extra light coming into the camera basically. We just have a look at this. Yes, the resolution for this, then it changes depending on whether you're in photo or video mode. So yeah, you can choose your photo resolutions, your video resolutions, all within that. So that's basically all of the main features of it. If we then just go into the settings mode, there's lots and lots of different settings. So we've got PTZ, Calib, Advanced, General and Live. Now PTZ means that you can adjust all the rates, so if you wanted a nice really slow moving gimbal you would tune these down, so you would say I don't want them at 80, I want them at say 20, and that will mean that you're moving in a tilt motion at 20 degrees per second as opposed to 80, and the maximum is 120. So if you're tracking fast moving objects you're going to want it fast. If you're wanting to do nice slow motion, slow movements, then you're going to want that in a slow rate of speed. All things that you'd have to play around with basically to get the best out of it. Calibration, you can do motor calibration and you can actually do 6-side calibration, and what that does is that basically recalibrates the motors, and if you're having problems with the horizon being off then you would do it within there. If we go into advanced, this is literally just what the output in terms of the quality, so video quality, I think it's bitrate, so MBS per second or bitrate per second, as to whether you've got it on excellent or optimized, etc. And then likewise the pano stop point interval, that's for how long it stops when it's taking a panoramic photo per point. Going into the general, it gives you the software versions, device, obviously nothing's filled in on there at the moment. And then you also have a couple of live streaming options, so you can actually put RMTP settings in here if you were to want to live stream, or you can go to Facebook Live as well as the Cine Weibo. So plenty of options in there. So hopefully that just gives you a brief overview of the app, and now what we really need to do is obviously test these out. So later in the video we'll get out on the road and we'll see what each of those features do. So out onto the open road we go, and as always we start with a fairly boring route, but it's the same route that I do for all the gimbal testing, and that just means that you can look at this, then you can move to another video of say the Gimbal C from Feiyu-Tech, and you can compare the different the different smoothness, the way that it copes with bumps, the way that it copes with roll drift, the way that it does its stabilisation. Now I'm filming at 1920 by 1080 at 30 frames a second. The Zhiyun app will allow you to go up to 1920 by 1080 at 60 frames a second, but 30 frames a second tends to be a more native kind of frame rate. Obviously the phone that I'm using, the iPhone 7, is capable of more than that. It can do 4K, but interestingly, much like Feiyu-Tech, the gimbal software won't allow you to use its native app at anything beyond 1920 by 1080. Not necessarily a bad thing, a lot of phones will do that. It would nice to be able to see that option, and naturally if I wanted to film at 4K I could just put the phone in the gimbal turn it on, and I could use the Apple app to actually drive the footage, and it would still give me a nice smooth 4K footage there. Now what we're looking for here is we're looking for things like roll drift. We want to have a nice locked horizon, which it seems to be doing very well. When you swing from left to right, you don't want that horizon to sag at the corners and then slowly compensate, because it does ruin that kind of smooth feeling. And historically, Zhiyun have been very, very good with this, and I would actually go as far as to say they're as good as DJI, or at least very, very close to it in the actual stabilisation sense. What I'm now doing is I'm now putting it into mode 2, so that means that I can tilt the gimbal forward and it will actually follow my motion. It means I can look down underneath me. As you can see, it's a fairly bumpy road, and with that being said, you need to bear in mind that the bumps on the road will translate through the bike, through my arm, and that up and down motion is something that's very difficult to compensate out. That's just something that is always going to be the case unless they start building some sort of four-dimensional compensator. It would need kind of a spring compressor in it to try and dampen out the bumps. Other things to notice, it was actually quite a windy day. It doesn't look like it when you see the trees not blowing too much, but down this particular bit of road, it's kind of like a wind tunnel. Now what that means is when you're using a phone, there is a large surface area for that wind to hit against, and that can actually push the motors and cause it to glitch out. Certainly on the Feiyu-Tech Gimbal C, that happened quite a bit in similar conditions to this, and it was very nice to see that the Zhiyun Smooth Q actually copes with this much better. Right now, for example, it's being blasted by air, but it doesn't seem to glitch out or have a problem with it. So in this shot, what I'm doing is actually playing around with the joystick. So I've just done a very swift movement to the left, literally just using the joystick. So I'm holding the gimbal in my hand, and then I'm using the joystick to see how smooth a kind of left to right pan that I can actually get when in the mode that allows you to do a left and right sweep. As you can see, it's not too bad. It was a little bit harsh there. Now I managed to really gently do it, and you can actually do quite a slow motion. Now I have this set at 80 degrees per second. I think that's kind of the measurement that they use basically within the app. You can change this from I think 0 to 120, and that's obviously going to mean that your motors can move much faster or slower depending on the types of shots you're doing. But all in all, apart from the fact that there is obviously a bit of wobble because I'm holding this in my hand, it's actually a pretty decent pan, and with a bit of control from your thumb you can do a nice pan around with the joystick on its own. So off the bike and now doing some walking footage. First thing you're going to notice is the usual up and down bounce that you do get with any 3-axis gimbal. That's purely for the fact that these gimbals are not designed to actually counteract an up and down motion, but it is something that if you do a bit of practice you can train yourself to compensate for with your wrist and your shoulder. One thing with this footage that was quite interesting is that I had just been playing around with the follow mode, so the object following mode, and because of that I had the motors in the 120 degrees per second maximum pan axis. Now that means that basically if I move my wrist left and right slightly to do these panning shots, that there is quite a large amount of sort of snappiness to it. I would certainly not recommend having it in this higher degree per second rotation if you were trying to get some smooth shots, because it just means that it's very, very sensitive to that. It defaults to 80 degrees per second. I would say you probably actually want it in more like 40 to 50 to get some nice smooth footage to try and do that. So you can see that I've been panning down now to my feet. That means I'm in the mode 2, which allows me to look up and down. One thing that is a bit of a shame in this feature is that when you've got it in this mode, you can't actually use the joystick to go left and right. What happens if you go left and right, it will actually tilt the gimbal, so it will cause the horizon to go off. Now that's great in terms of being able to set up the horizon, but it was a bit annoying that I couldn't actually use that, and it's something that if you forget that happens, you can really ruin your shot by doing it. So that's definitely a bit of a negative on Zhiyun's point there. So now I'm playing around with the object tracking mode. I was very pleased to see that Zhiyun have done this. Feiyu-Tech only have face tracking, which is literally looking for facial features, whereas Zhiyun have gone the route that DJI did, which is to say you can draw around an object and then the software will try and keep track of that object and obviously pan the gimbal around to follow it. Now, while it's nice to see that they've done this, the actual execution of it is a little bit iffy. As you can see here, there's reasonable light. I've got fairly obvious features with the hat and the glasses, and it does sort of cope with it, but every once in a while the light will get a problem, it will find itself just tripping out, and if you get too far away from it, it really just doesn't cope too well with it. It's one of those things that may be something that they can improve in the future with software changes, but I just felt that unless you were using this purely for standing in front of a camera talking fairly close up, I think you would find that it would cause a bit of a problem. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to actually do the same thing here. So a bike, it's a fairly obvious shape, there's obvious colours to it. Yes, it's black and silver, that may be a slight problem, so things like the puddles in the background could cause it an issue, and obviously if I turn to an angle, the bike itself is going to disappear. Now, the software doesn't do terribly with it. It does seem to sort of recognise it there, it locks back on, but as you can see when I'm moving, this is the maximum speed. There's 120 degrees of movement on the axes, and that means it can't actually move very fast to keep up with you. Now, don't get me wrong, it's not terrible, it's just definitely subpar. DJI's one, you draw a little green box around you and it can follow you even if you're really quite far away. You can trick it, don't get me wrong, it's not perfect by any means, but it's definitely a lot better than this particular Zhiyun one does. But with that said, I much prefer the fact that this is an object follow as opposed to a face follow, which is the only thing you get with the Feiyu-Tech products, and you've just really got to find the sweet spot with it to actually get the use out of it. Moving now on to a quick demonstration of the motion time-lapse, which is a feature I was very, very pleased to see actually. The Feiyu-Tech products don't have motion time-lapse at all, so you can only do time-lapse with it just sat there, just like you can your normal phone, and frankly I'd probably use my phone app for that anyway. Very nice to see that the motors are nice and smooth. There's a couple of points to pick up on, so I am going to talk a little bit more about this in the conclusions, but just an example there. So now let's move on to the Panorama Mode, and on face value it actually looks very, very good. There are 3 different modes to use. There's 180 degrees, 330 degrees, and then there's the grid format, which kind of gives you a fisheye by taking 3 photos pointing upwards, then 3 in the middle, then 3 pointing downwards, and it sort of stitches them all together. And again, when you look at these pictures, you can see that on face value they are very good. The stitching is pretty much impeccable. You really cannot tell where one photo starts, where the other begins, and what's nice about it is the hardware does it for you. So you set the panorama mode, you hold the gimbal steady, and it will then move the motors, take the photo, move on to the next, take the photo. You don't have to do any movement yourself. The issue that unfortunately comes with this is the fact that it does it in a landscape mode, and the output, it only gives about 412 pixels high. You can see when I zoom in here, this is kind of panning along the shots that we've already seen. The stitching, fantastic, but the actual resolution is pretty grainy, and if you compare that to the way that something like the iPhone takes panoramic, you'll find that that's about 2184 pixels high. So when you zoom into it, while it is a very wide picture, you really do get some reasonable quality, whereas these only really look good when you review it on a phone or when you kind of, look at it on a much smaller device. If you were to use this for, say, canvases or prints, I think unfortunately you'd be a bit disappointed with the outcome. So let's draw some conclusions now on the Zhiyun Smooth Q, and I have to admit I've been really impressed with this. I came into this video review expecting to be comparing it to the Feiyu-Tech SPG Live and the Feiyu-Tech Gimbal C, both of which I've reviewed and own, but I have to admit I feel that would almost be a bit of an insult to this gimbal because it is just so much better. It's actually more comparable to the DJI Osmo Mobile that I own in terms of its features, its build quality, and just the way that it does everything. Now granted, the DJI Osmo Mobile 2 has just come out. That is £120 compared to the Osmo Mobile 1, which was £220, and bearing in mind that this Zhiyun is currently available on Amazon for £99, that puts it in very, very close range of it. Now with that being said, I don't think you're going to end up being jealous of anyone who owns a DJI Osmo, whether it be a 1 or a 2, if you own the Zhiyun Smooth Q, because it does the basics very, very well. Let's just touch on some of the actual major plus points of this gimbal then. The one that I want to mention first is the battery life. This thing lasts for absolute ages. I've filmed for 3 or 4 hours with no issues whatsoever, and it's not dropped under 90%. Zhiyun say it should last about 12 hours. I believe that's probably quite accurate. Naturally, it's going to be hard to tell how long that battery lasts over time, but when you're filming on a mobile phone, you're going to find that your phone's dying a lot more frequently than the gimbal is, so I don't think it's going to be a major issue. too. I do like the fact that you can charge your phone through the Zhiyun. It is a bit of a fiddle to set up, but it's one of those things that when you actually need it, because you've got a really nice shot, let's say you've got a nice sunset, something you don't want to miss, it's lovely to know that you have that option as long as you have a charge cable with you. The next talking point has got to be the app itself. Now, I've been using the iOS app. I can't really speak for the Android app, but everything about the app so far has really impressed me. The main thing is its reliability. I love the fact that I can go to the app, it connects first time, I don't have to mess around with Bluetooth pairing, anything like that. When it goes in, it seems to be very reliable, and I can just record, I can do all of my filming, my photos, my time lapses, and so far I've not had it drop out or die at all. Now, you kind of expect that, of course, but from historical use of Chinese gimbals, I found them to be very unreliable when it comes to the actual app. Let's take a look at Feiyu-Tech, for example. On the Gimbal C recently, one of their latest gimbals, the app literally dies every time you use the panoramic mode, and sometimes in the middle of filming as well, which just makes you have no confidence in the product whatsoever, because ultimately all you're wanting to do is get footage. If it stops through that footage, you lose it. There's no way of necessarily getting it back. So it's really nice to see that Zhiyun have done well on this. When it comes to the negatives of this product, there isn't a huge amount to talk about, and most of them are kind of niggly. The ones that I found are the major kind of gripes for me is the motion time-lapse, for example. Now, I mentioned when I was showing a demonstration of this that I needed to talk about this a little bit more. The issue is basically that a point A to point B is really smooth. There's no problems with that whatsoever. However, if you introduce different points within your motion time-lapse, so very much like DJI, you can point a place to start, you can then move to another location to have a middle point, go to a final location. The issue is the points in the middle have stopping gaps, and they're very, very noticeable. It doesn't have a smooth fluid to it. It goes to that location, stops, and then starts moving again. And when you're dealing with a time-lapse, that's something that you want to avoid. The good part is that the actual steps within all of the micro movements are very smooth. So if you just do a point A to point B, you can actually get a really nice result. And I would go as far as to say that actually those steps are better than the DJI Osmo in that respect, so you can get some good time lapses out of it. The next feature that's got some problems with it is definitely the object following. It was a little bit unreliable. It does seem to heavily rely on the ambient light and colours in the background, and I think it's really only something that's going to be very useful if you're quite close to the camera. So if you're doing, interviews, or if you're doing vlogging or something like that, I think it will track you absolutely brilliantly. But I think if you're looking to, say, film a radio control car scooting around on the floor or something that's moving quite quickly, it's really going to struggle with it. Again, it's one of those things that it's only a negative because it doesn't do it amazingly, but then again, all of these object followings from all the manufacturers do have their flaws, including DJI, so it's not something that I would want to draw on too much as a really bad thing. Overall though, this is a fantastic bit of kit. I highly recommend it, and I'm very happy that I've been able to have a bit of time to see it. I'm looking forward to being able to pit this up against the DJI Osmo Mobile 2, because I think it is going to be quite a close runner with it. And stay tuned on this channel, hopefully we'll get a video of the Osmo Mobile 2 soon, as well as the Zhiyun Smooth 4, which is also coming out fairly soon. Anyway, hopefully this has been helpful to anyone who's looking to buy one of these, and fingers crossed I will see you on the next one.